Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am joined today by Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor, analyst, and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. I wanted to discuss with you today what is happening in Yemen, as we now see the United States is bombing Yemen, and we see very aggressive and warlike rhetoric coming from Trump as well, who has in the past championed himself as the person who would keep America out of these wars in that part of the world. However, we also see that Yemen has been under foreign attack since 2015, led by the US and the British, but also with various Arab neighbors. But given that it's been under wars for so many years, what is the likelihood now of the US being successful? And also, how can we explain or understand the extent to which Yemen has been successful in terms of defending itself?
I don't think he's going to be successful, meaning Trump. Uh, as you rightly pointed out, there's been a decade of war and genocide targeting Yemen. And we see that Ansarullah, what they call the Houthis in the West, they and their allies remain in power. The overwhelming majority of the people of Yemen live in areas that are controlled by Ansarullah and its allies, and the capital is controlled. Sana'a is also controlled by this coalition. So they are the government, and the Saudis spent literally hundreds of billions of dollars, and I would imagine the Emiratis spent almost as much, if not just as much, to overthrow them, building proxy armies, bombing them day and night. And this is, I think, a key uh, issue. They literally bombed Yemen 24 hours a day for years, for 7 years, and they destroyed the country's infrastructure. But they failed. They failed to overthrow the government. They failed to defeat Ansarullah. And by the end of the war, about 3 years ago, the Saudis had to accept, or the Saudis sought a ceasefire because Yemen was growing stronger and its missile and drone capabilities were also growing much stronger, and they started to strike Saudi oil and key infrastructure, other key infrastructure. So, and from my understanding, Saudi oil production capacity has never fully recovered, even to this day. It no longer has the capacity that it did before because of the damage that the Yemeni missile and drone capabilities brought about. So uh, then we saw the Americans at the beginning of the genocide in Gaza. They started bombing Yemen because Yemen said they're going to block the Red Sea to the Israeli regime until the genocide stops. And the Biden team, they decided to destroy Yemen's capabilities and destroy Ansarullah, sort of what the same thing that Trump is saying now. But they also failed. They bombed the country for a year and a half. And we have to keep in mind when the Saudis were bombing, because they were spending hundreds of billions of dollars, uh, and they were using their own air bases. So it would cost them less, and they had a lot more money. And you had American and especially British advisors. You had people from all across the West. There were weapons coming in. There were advisors coming in. Uh, Western military industries made a killing, literally, and no success. So now, after the Saudis with Western support failed, after Biden failed, now Trump thinks he's going to succeed. I don't see that happening. It is going to be costly. Already, we see that the Americans have been forced to move their naval ships to the north of the Red Sea that makes any bombing campaign more expensive and more costly. Uh, and if the Americans seek to defend themselves, they're going to have to use very expensive missile defense systems against very inexpensive but high-tech drones and missiles. So this is going to cost the U.S. economy uh, a lot. I mean, it's not like Ukraine, but under the current circumstances where the United States is in a lot of economic trouble, and while we are seeing that the war in Ukraine is not ending as easily as Trump would have hoped, I think this is going to be substantial. But more importantly, I think is the fact that when ultimately Trump fails, he's going to be seen as incapable because Biden never made the open claims that he's going to, this is the end and we're going to finish them off and they're done for. Uh, they were very aggressive. They tried to defeat the Yemeni armed forces, but they couldn't open the Red Sea. In fact, the Yemeni armed forces broadened the siege because of American and British attacks. I don't think Trump is going to do much better than Biden, and I think he's just going to face ultimately humiliation. But also, Trump has destroyed that little bit of soft power that he gained for himself when he sort of presented himself as a peacemaker. Some of our mutual friends, I think, I'm not saying they believed him, but they were hoping that maybe he would be different. Scott Ritter, for example, he was hoping this would be different. And I understand. I didn't think he'd be different, but I understand why he would think that way and why he would, hope beyond hope that maybe Trump would behave differently. But after what we saw in Gaza and the mass slaughter that we've seen over the past hours and the genocidal strikes on Yemen, which have killed women and children, that facade has been thrown aside. And that is not good for Trump. That's not good for the United States. And I think it's not going to be good for Trump inside the United States. His opponents, uh, they did nothing to help the people of Yemen or Gaza. But I think there are a lot of people in the United States who will want to use this any opportunity to hit back at Trump in the political establishment. And of course, there's a lot of discontent on the streets anyway about the Israeli regime and about US policy in our region. So I don't think any of this is good for Trump. I don't see him as succeeding either.
Well, I think he might set himself up for a rhetorical trap by speaking such a big game and then leaving himself very few ways of pulling away from this. But in terms of the mere, I guess, weaponry, how is Yemen? Is it the mobility of its weapons? Is it the underground storage facilities? How can you explain the inability of these air campaigns to have yeah, I guess significant impact on the fighting capabilities of Yemen?
Yemen is, in some ways, similar to Gaza in that Ansarullah controls the land. Most of Yemen, which is not a desert, where people can actually live and thrive, those areas are controlled by Ansarullah, or the Houthis, as they say in the West. Not all, but most, and the capital. So a huge population, a huge area, mountainous, is controlled by those forces that are saying that they are imposing the genocide convention, right? They're blocking the Red Sea in order to force the Israeli regime to stop the genocide. And in particular, they wanted to stop the starvation siege, which began 16, 17 days ago. That's why we're where we are right now. The Israeli regime, they blocked all food and medicine and water and electricity from going into Gaza against the ceasefire agreement. Ansarullah, they stopped targeting ships that were going to Israeli ports because of the ceasefire. And then when they saw the starvation siege implemented by the Israelis, they threatened to restart it. And when the Israelis did not halt the siege, then they began this new phase of blocking Israeli ships. So they have this huge territory. It's mountainous, but also they've been fighting uh, for 10 years entities which have powerful air forces. I mean, the Saudis have a huge air force, the Emiratis, the Americans, of course, the British, not really, but they're America's sidekick. The Israeli regime as well. So they have, over the years, they've built all of their key installations deep underground. But they are similar to Gaza in that they have full control. Unlike in Lebanon, where Hezbollah had a huge disadvantage, and that was that Hezbollah never controlled Lebanon. Lebanon has over 40 Western embassies, roughly 40 Western embassies. Then you have Japan and Korea and other embassies that are very close to the West. All of these are more or less used by the United States to gather intelligence, or have been used over the last couple of decades to gather intelligence. You have all these NGOs. I don't think there's any country in the world that compares to Lebanon when it comes to this sheer amount of money spent on NGOs uh, compared to the population, even in Ukraine. I'm pretty sure that in Lebanon they spend a lot more. So all these NGOs are against Hezbollah. All of these, so you have all these intelligence agencies, and then you have these political groups like the Lebanese forces, which were partners with the Israeli regime when in 1982 they invaded the country and took Beirut. And they were the ones, among others, that carried out the Sabra Shatila massacre, where 3,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Shia were slaughtered in like 36 hours in 1982. So you have these fascistic groups aligned with Western embassies. You have all that money. So Hezbollah was always vulnerable because it's the enemy, the Israelis, could always get intelligence from inside Lebanon very easily. In Gaza, that's not the case because Gaza is controlled on the inside by Hamas and its allies, Islamic Jihad, and it's more difficult for the Israeli regime to gather intelligence. People who work in Israel, or who used to work in Israel, Palestinians, some of them would be um, forced to spy for the Israelis. Uh, but um, but in any case, in Yemen, it's like Gaza, where Ansarullah has control over that area. So it's very difficult for the Americans to get the sort of intelligence that they have in Lebanon. It's very difficult for them to know exactly what's going on in Yemen. So they have all their key installations deep underground. They have control over the area. The the West doesn't have the ability to have a lot of people on the ground gathering intelligence, and they've become increasingly sophisticated. They are a sophisticated people. Yemen had very good universities and has very good young students and scholars. I'm Without a doubt, I'm absolutely certain that the Iranians have given them a lot of assistance and aid to push forward their capabilities. Those that So that ability existed, and the Iranians helped them become more developed. And so I think that it's literally impossible for the Americans to defeat Yemen unless the Americans decide to invade the country and put in what, a million people, 700,000 people to invade Yemen. I don't think that's possible for the United States anymore. That era is over. The United States doesn't have that sort of money, and it doesn't have the political will either. So the Americans can keep bombing, uh, but the Yemenis know how to use decoys. Much of the bombing, if not most of the bombing, is just carried out against decoys. and the Yemeni radar capabilities and missile capabilities and drone capabilities are mobile. They go out from underground, and there are different underground bases, find their target, fire at it, and then go back. And the Americans really can't do anything about it. And again, since they are able to strike the Americans, in order to protect their ships and planes, the Americans have to go far away to the north of the Red Sea, as I said. And that makes flying over Yemen much more expensive uh, and more difficult. And thus it takes more time for them to find targets. If they're firing missiles, and it takes more time for them to find the place where the missile or the drones were fired and to get there and to strike. So the Yemenis are in a strong position. And of course, the Americans are going to kill people. They're going to kill, and they've been killing women and children, but I don't see success at all. Personally, I think there are also a couple of other interpretations that we can put in here. One is that I think that the United States is using this war in Yemen to help the Israeli regime, but also I think Trump is probably or possibly distracting attention away from his lack of success with the Russians, because as we saw in the negotiations from the readouts, it seems that President Putin didn't give anything really. Even the agreement not to strike uh, energy producing targets that for 30 days, that's not really a concession. I think it's just a token gesture to allow Trump to save face. Not that there isn't a chance for peace, but I think that it's going to be under much more difficult circumstances for Trump than maybe he expected. I think the Russians are going to get more or less what they want, and so this could be a distraction to show the Americans as being tough, like Greenland and Canada, and Panama. But I think it's also probably most importantly directed at Iran. And the United States does not want to strike Iran because the consequences would be mind-boggling. I think it would bring down the global economy in a way in which we have not seen for a century. And but by striking Yemen, the Americans can raise tensions and uh, hopefully, from their perspective, intimidate Iran into backing down, which is not going to happen. Iran will continue to support Yemen. Iran will continue to support Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank and Palestinian groups. That's not going to change. But I personally don't think that the Americans want war with Iran. Netanyahu, I'm sure, does. But I think that there are enough sane people in the Pentagon who understand the consequences of war with Iran. I mean, when they cannot defeat Yemen, Iran is infinitely more capable and powerful. And the Persian Gulf is these small states or regimes or these family dictatorships that have huge oil and gas reserves. They would not exist if after a few days of missiles and drones going back and forth. That it would be the end of these regimes. Qatar is has a population of 350,000. Overwhelmingly, the people there are foreigners. The same is true with the Emirates. They have American bases. They won't last. And Saudi oil production, the tankers in the Persian Gulf, Qatari oil, gas production, Kuwait, everything would come to an end. I mean, these are glass palaces, these are glass mansions. And when they have American bases, they are complicit. They have been complicit with Yemen. Um, the Yemenis said that they use the air bases in the Persian Gulf region, the Americans, and of course Saudi airspace. And then the Yemenis, not the government, but the pundits who would go on media in Yemen, started saying that those who are helping the United States, meaning Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirates, in bombing, and the Saudis in bombing Yemen, that they should beware. So, when they are completely vulnerable, uh, not just from Iran, but from all sides. I don't think the Americans want a war with Iran, but Yemen is the next best thing.
I notice that the US government, as well as the media coverage, it keeps referring to Yemen simply as Houthis or terrorists or proxies of Iran. So, how are you reading this? Is this just an effort to strip Yemen of all agency, or how you how are you interpreting this?
Yeah, so the Houthis are the terrorist proxies of the Iranian regime.
Yeah,
So all
that's
these words, regime, proxies. First of all, they're not Houthis. The Houthis are a tribe, a powerful tribe in Yemen. But Ansar Allah is much broader than just that tribe. And Ansar Allah and its allies constitute the overwhelming majority of the country. If they did not have popular support, they could have, they could not have lasted under 7 years of Saudi dirty war. And the Saudis were paying tribes to flip. They were paying people to turn against them. They had huge money, and Yemen is the poorest country in the Arab world. But they failed. And of course, the Emirati money and their military were working alongside the Saudis. If these were just proxies, they couldn't last, especially at a time when Iran was under maximum pressure. The maximum pressure sanctions in Iran were aimed partially to, according to Trump and Obama before Trump, to prevent Iran from funding its so-called proxies. Well, so Iran was under maximum pressure. The Saudis and the Emiratis with full Western support were attacking the country, but they failed. That's not a proxy. That's a popular movement. And so they have agency, and you're absolutely correct. They want to deny them agency. The Iranians don't order them around. The Iranians don't order Hezbollah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad or the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces. They are allies. They think they have similar worldviews. They're anti-imperialists, anti-colonialists, and opposing American hegemony. And these different entities with different backgrounds and different cultures, coming from different sects and different beliefs, religious beliefs, they came together and they united in this way. So Yemen does make its own decisions. Iran supports it. Iran will continue to support it. There's no doubt about that. But the Americans and the Europeans want to present it in a different light because it benefits, it helps them with narrative building. But the problem is like in many other issues, and this is something that you're an expert on, and that is when they frame things, they believe their own propaganda. For example, USAID funds people, or NED funds people and organizations to create to build a particular narrative. And then these organizations, they start giving senators and congressmen and other influential people money for speeches to take part in programs. And the money that comes from the government goes back to the government. So and then they're telling them what's going on, but the narrative that they are building is coming from the government itself. So it's a circle. It's a circle. The narrative is fake. They believe their own propaganda, and they also have a vested interest in pursuing that narrative because they're receiving money, and the people who are paying them are also receiving money from the groups, from the NGOs. So they believe, after a while, they believe their propaganda, whether it's about Ukraine or whether it's about Lebanon or Palestine or Yemen or Iran. It really doesn't make a difference. That's how the system works, or at least that's how part of the system works. And so it's useful to them to say that, well, Yemen doesn't have agency, they're not legitimate, they're just proxies, so bombing them is somehow legitimate. They shouldn't be there. They're a bunch of terrorists, they're pirates, and when we bomb them, we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, no, it's funny you would mention Ukraine on this because we did the same to people in Donbass. That is, well, before the Western countries supported the removal of Yanukovych back in 2014, it was widely recognized that a CIA director, various ambassadors, it was common sense that if you would try to pull Ukraine in towards NATO orbit, then Donbass would probably rebel because approximately 90% of them voted for Yanukovych. Yet, once he was toppled, yeah, the predictable happened. There was a very organic uprising there as well. I'm sure they had support from Russia. But then yeah, the immediate narrative was well, there were an agency. No one talked about the Ukrainians because why talk about the legitimate grievances of the people who had their democratically elected government removed and who started to ban their language and culture. So they all became almost overnight just proxies of Russia. They had no free will. It was just instruments of power. Putin sitting in the Kremlin, pulling his strings and making things happen. And as you said, all the media just fed into it. All the politicians repeat it. And when you eventually come and challenge this narrative, and even point to the evidence that is what they used to say before 2014, then it's like, well, this is a bit controversial because there's a consensus. Everyone's saying the same thing, and if you're challenging it, then you're standing on the outside of the narrative. So now it's controversial, and we don't listen to controversial people. So it's a very yeah, and I think this is a key problem. That is, it's not just being deceitful. I think a lot of these people, I used to think that, but they genuinely do believe their own nonsense, and I think their own propaganda. I think this is very dangerous, and this is also problematic if you think striking Tehran somehow is gonna change the attitude in Yemen. Yeah, it's quite strange. But before you mentioned
But
that,
also,
yeah,
there's another good example on Ukraine, just to add to that, and that is after the coup. Uh, After the coup, and for at least 3, 4 years, more than 3, 4 years, you would see regular cases where the Western media was saying that Ukraine had a Nazi problem or a neo-Nazi problem, and Azov battalion was sometimes repeated or mentioned in articles in the West. But then, after the war began, that changed completely, and the war was unprovoked, and there was no more talk of any Nazi problem in Ukraine. So the narrative is tightly controlled, and the media, the state, all of them work in close cooperation, much more than I actually believe existed decades ago. When Chomsky wrote Manufacturing Consent, which was a very good book, the situation, the media was, as he pointed out, that there was, to a large degree, this cooperation uh, between wealth and the state and the media. But when you look at what's going on now, I think Chomsky's very important work is very outdated today.
yeah.
It's
No,
much
it's
worse.
no the this is the most interesting part is the funding of all of this USAID and these other institutions see how deep involvement they actually had in creating these false narratives. But in terms of Yemen, though, you did mention well, since 2015, the Saudis were quite well deeply involved in this. But since also in connection with seeking to improve ties with Iran, they've taken a step back from this costly and I guess a destructive endeavor. But do you see any possibilities of the United States being able to bring on the Saudis directly into restarting hostilities towards Yemen, or do you think this is unlikely?
Saudi Arabia is very vulnerable, and Yemen can destroy Saudi oil production very easily. Its capabilities today are much better than they were 3, 4 years ago. And Saudi uh, oil production is very important for energy stability globally. So I don't think that the Americans would want to push that too hard because they understand the consequences. And I'm sure the Saudis are not interested in that either. The Saudis were very quick to say that we did not, I think they said that Arabia, but they did use Saudi airspace. Uh, but still, I think that the Saudis would want to stay out of this, and I think that the Saudis um are so vulnerable that the Americans would probably, at least the sane people in Washington, uh, sinister but sane, that they would probably want this not they would not want the Saudis to get involved militarily, or at least too much. Again, I don't believe the United States, those people in the Pentagon who know the reality, I don't think that they at all would want a war with Iran, and I don't think that the same sort of people, uh, would want the Saudis to get involved in Yemen in a big way. It would just be devastating for the Yemen would have an excuse to destroy Saudi oil installations, and that would mean a global economic depression.